Hi, editing AJ here. Just before we start the episode, I just wanted to make a quick note. This episode is very current and about the things that are currently happening in the pop world, and it was recorded June 14th, 2024. We are not releasing this episode until July 2024, so I just wanted to make a little note that there might be one or two specific things or comments that you might hear in this episode, and these are very clearly time-stamped to June 2024. Anyway, I just wanted to get that out of the way, and without further ado, here's the episode. Hey, welcome to Main Pod Girl, a podcast made by Popheads for Popheads. Every episode, we'll be diving into all kinds of pop culture topics with some of our favorite artists and music commentators. I'm your host, AJ Marks, and today's superstar panel consists of three amazing guests. First off, we have a Rolling Stone senior writer who's profiled tons of your favorite pop stars, including Adele, Cardi B, and Miley Cyrus. You may know her as the host of the podcasts Don't Let This Flop and 500 Greatest Albums, or as a recurring panelist on Rolling Stone Music Now. She literally taught the college course on Taylor Swift. It's returning guest, Brittany Spanos. Next up, we have a girl who's done it all, having worked at MTV, Spin, and CBS, as well as writing for Rolling Stone, Entertainment Weekly, and The Guardian. You can catch a couple of my quotes about the pop girlies in one of her articles for Bustle, and she's also in the new doc Taylor Swift vs. Scooter Braun, Bad Blood, which is now streaming on Max. Please welcome Rachel Brodsky. And behind door number 3, we have Billboard's executive digital director. She co-hosts Billboard's Pop Shop podcast, for which she's interviewed everyone from Dua Lipa to Kylie Minogue to Troye Sivan. I'm of course talking about Katie Atkinson. We're gathered here today to talk about the art of album rollouts, and it's going to be hard to wrangle in all of the different variables, so I was thinking we could maybe go through it stage by stage. I want to kick things off by establishing what our personal favorite album rollouts have been this year. Like, where do we all stand with that?
I'm in the Charlie place this week.
Yeah.
Been feeling good about her rollout. I've liked that. It feels like it wasn't too far in advance and it wasn't too last minute, but I also didn't have to cover it.
Fair enough. She's been a little messy this year, but in a way that's clearly working for her.
Yeah.
It's fitting with her brand.
I may be a little biased, but I want to say Bonnie McKee's rollout is the one for me because it's been such a unique journey as a fan watching all these leaked songs from 11 years ago get re-recorded and officially rolled out into the perfect summer album. I've been working on parts of this rollout with her, so I am biased, but seeing it from the inside, I just know how much hard work she's putting in, and that's really been the most rewarding rollout so far for me.
I think there have been so many examples of really A-list stars who basically aren't doing rollouts. They're basically just you're going to hear it all on one day. And that feels obviously that's not a brand new thing, but it feels like a lot more of people of a certain level have adopted that this year. Obviously, Taylor Swift, Billie Eilish both did everything in one day. Ariana did one song and then said, you're going to get the rest all in one day. So is that a rollout? It's they didn't even roll it out, or is it just a drop? It's just different.
I was actually going to say that the Ariana rollout was my favorite in terms of the A-list rollouts, just because the one single I think was a really good sort of starting point for the album. And then kind of the mixture of the clues, but not overdoing it, kind of trying to hint at the title through the movie reference. And she gave just enough information and just enough interviews where it didn't feel like overkill, but I was still very excited for the album.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. And I feel like the single We Can't Be Friends being the day of album release song really worked too.
Yeah.
And then obviously now we've got the Boy Is Mine video, which made an even bigger splash. So it's she actually is doing a little bit more of an old school rollout in the sense that we're getting it a piece at a time.
Yeah.
For me, it's thinking really hard about album rollouts. Started in 2013 with the Beyonce drop because it was so innovative for the time. But since then, I've just noticed the pendulum swing depending on like your brand and depending on your marketing. I mean, I think Taylor Swift is kind of like an ideal case study for looking at the long-term rollout or the traditional, and it's only gotten, I think, like more Easter egg hunty. But she also has done like the quick drop, like Evermore and Folklore on during COVID, because we were in kind of this like intimate, small, like it felt like anything grander than that would be too much because we were all just like living in our small spaces and not really able to like go out. And now she's kind of returned to a more grandiose space. So I've been really interested to see like the kind of going back and forth and back and forth. And now it's kind of like choose your own adventure depending on like who you are in the pop ecosystem.
Now I want to dip into the essentials of an album rollout, with the first stage being an ability to know when is the right time to release. Like, when are people hungry for your music? Katy Perry felt like she really waited until the demand for a new album was at its peak, all the while updating her certifications, releasing Teenage Dream vinyls, having every old song of hers go viral on TikTok. It feels masterfully crafted to wash out the Witness Katy from their brain and bring back the Teenage Dream Katy. On the other hand, you have an artist like Taylor Swift, with some of the conversation around her new album revolving around the sentiment that she jumped the gun a bit after having such a big year in 2023.
We might need to just like separate the Taylor conversation into its own conversation.
Yeah.
It's true. Yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
But you mentioned Katy. Like, I'm super impressed with what's going on now because people are excited for Katy Perry music. I'm not that surprised like that this is the moment, because I remember when I first heard Espresso in April thinking this would have been such a good Katy Perry hit. You know what I mean? Like, it's cheeky and like cute. And I feel like we haven't had, you know, that kind of vibe in a minute. And like, I feel like the world is ready for more Katy music, and she obviously is seizing on the timing.
Yeah.
So for Katy, I think she's doing it right. But then I think there are people like Taylor who literally feels like fans are insatiable.
I guess the alternative then to Katy would be like Ariana Grande from 2013 to 2020. She like released, 6 albums in that time, in like 7 years. It's so hard to know when to strike, especially because now people are so conscious of like who else is releasing at the time. And now more artists are like kind of holding their cards closer to their chest, I think.
I think that good nostalgia cycle. So it's been about 10 years since the like Teenage Dream era, and without knowing her or knowing her business strategy, I think she's like coming back at a good time, because some of the like younger listeners who grew up, who were kids when Teenage Dream came out, are like, they're probably feeling nostalgic for that time. So I think she's kind of rounding the corner at a good time to really tap into that.
Yeah, I think the exact science comes down more to gauging your own sort of public clout and having a very good self-awareness of it, which I think is what a lot of pop stars tend to lack, engaging that, and kind of where the failed rollouts tend to happen. You know, like there's a difference, right, between like Fiona Apple, for example, is someone who releases albums, like, you know, she has very long gaps between her albums, and she's not necessarily in a public conversation in a way that, you know, Taylor Swift or Katy Perry is at any given point in between those albums. But she, as an artist, kind of has built her fan base and her kind of existence around that. And then you see, this is like not a one-to-one comparison at all, but just like in terms of a length, like Normani taking so long between dropping the singles and actually releasing the album kind of overestimated the amount of impact or desire for that album in that moment, I guess. Like, I think sometimes like pop stars like wrongly gauge that sort of hype and sort of their own position in the kind of pop ecosystem. And you can kind of wield that in different ways for like different periods of like, you know, either releasing like 2 albums a year or waiting like 5 years, you know, if that makes sense.
I think the Taylor Swift issue, I do think Taylor is at a point in her career where she's so unmatched that there are fewer checks and balances, I guess, to use kind of a political term. Like, no one's really telling her no, just to be plain spoken about it. And I think that, like, it's so easy, as Brittany was saying, to lose perspective of where just self-awareness and where you fall as a pop star. But you're that much more likely to lose that perspective if someone's afraid to tell you.
Yeah. Or if they're like, you're Taylor Swift, like, who am I to think that you should wait before or not release a double album?
But I liked your Ariana example too, because if you look at like when she went from like Sweetener to Thank You Next, I mean, that was such a short period of time, but she was so like in the zeitgeist and had something brand new to say already.
Yeah.
Because the news cycle was so quick with her. It was like we all wanted to hear exactly what had transpired in the last 5 months of her life, you know? And she knew that. And then if you look at putting this album out now, I think a lot of people assumed we weren't going to get new Ariana music until after at least Wicked Part 1 came out, because it was like, oh, she's like in actress mode. She's been filming this, you know, movie. There's no chance that we're getting new music, but she had something new to say because once again, she's in the news cycle and people wanted to hear what she said about her new relationship and her divorce and all of this. And so she knew it was time for music to like put that out there again. And she was right. And that's just going to make people more excited to see movie star Ariana after like pop star Ariana checked back in. So she seems to really like understand the cadence. Like, better than most.
I was going to say, I made a list of like album rollouts that have been criticized for being long. Obviously, Dopamine is on there, the Normani album. I remember, obviously, Fergie, Double Duchess, did not pan out in her favor with how long that album rollout was. But even Katy Perry, with her last album, really felt like she did not do a good job at testing the waters. She released like 3 one-off singles, barely promoted them, and then kind of went dark and then like restarted with a new single and then added 2 of the old singles on the album. It just felt like the anti-rollout if Anti had included like Bitch Better Have My Money and...
It's the anti-rollout.
Yes, it's the anti rollout for sure.
Do you think that albums are even 100% done when the rollout starts? We all, I think, at least have a small enough window into like how the music industry functions as an industry, and it's a big old mess. I've been sent promos and links to things and announcements that, hey, this is happening, and it's like this, we're getting the album rollout started. Like it's all ostensibly in the service of an album rollout, except the finished product is not finished yet. And so I wonder how much that comes into play when it appears messy, or there is too much time between the first single and then the eventual album drop.
I like when an artist finishes an album and then releases it. I feel like, I mean, some people get really lucky, you know, going back to the album rollout of our lifetime, like Teenage Dream. Like, she wasn't finished with that album when I think the first 2 singles came out.
I don't think I knew that. Whoa. Crazy.
I think that she, at least for California Girls, had not finished the album yet. And like some people just get really lucky with having the perfect lead before the album's even done. I think Bonnie McKee as well, for this album that came out this year, that was supposed to come out 10 years ago, the single that she released that I still think is like one of the best lead singles of all time was a song that she'd only finished, I think, 50 or 60% of the album by the time that came out. And I thought that was like fascinating. Like, you're putting all this promo into a song, and it's like then you have to write a follow-up single. Like she wrote the follow-up single while she was promoting the song that was already out. I just think that's fascinating. Like, Ariana, I think, is the kind of person, judging by like Thank You Next and Eternal Sunshine especially, she's the kind of person to like finish a whole project, then be like, this is how I want to roll it out. Billie Eilish, the same way.
Definitely Billie.
We got to bring up Beyonce too, again, the most recent Beyonce, because with Cowboy Carter, it became clear when that album came out that there were differences between the streaming track list and the vinyl track list. That's another thing where like these artists who want to operate within the traditional sales method of like, they want to have physical product on release week, you know, they've got to lock in the album, but then as like artists, they're continually changing it all the way up to the actual streaming release. So then fans get 2 different drafts of the same album, basically. And so it's like we can see that, oh, she was not done. It was not done and dusted when she locked the vinyl in however many months ago to make sure the like, you know, vinyl plant could print it.
Yeah.
So that's another aspect.
Totally. I'm still surprised by some of the artists that like admit that the album wasn't done by the time they announced the album release date. Pink Friday 2, I don't even think it was done when she released it.
She was still trying to clear samples on Twitter days before.
Didn't she have to take one of the songs down or something like that?
Yeah.
Because of so that is the Kanye strategy, is just like, I made the song, I'm just gonna release it. But like, I don't know. I think if you want to do that, doing the Lil Nas X SoundCloud song drip thing that he's doing right now is probably the way to go, of like, give the fans something. But you can't make a big, high budget, extensive rollout with all of these moving parts if you're going to be doing it in the moment.
Yeah, I think also like the problem that's existed even before streaming, and even going back to like the Teenage Dream era of music, is like the way of figuring out how to make an artist successful that isn't already a surefire thing has been so muddied over the years. Like, thinking like the 2008 to like 2012-ish era of music, of like, we have like the album, then we don't necessarily know if the sophomore album's going to do well, so let's like do like a super deluxe version of it, or like thinking of like the
Super
Fame
deluxe.
Monster, where it's like the Fame Monster should have just been a sophomore album, but they weren't sure probably like how much of a guarantee that it could be bigger than Just Dance and Poker Face had been prior. Thinking of like Teenage Dream Deluxe and kind of adding on songs and songs and songs instead of investing in the next rollout. And then we get into the streaming era, where it's like, okay, let's just see how many singles we can get out for a newer artist, or an artist who's, kind of a mid-tier artist who, again, kind of maybe has ups and downs, maybe, is not sort of going to be set to sell out arenas just yet, or not set to have like a top 10 single necessarily. And just like, let's just see how that goes. So I think it's really a lot of the labels and even artists as independent artists who just kind of struggle with like, do I want to invest in making a really expensive piece of work if I don't think anyone's going to listen to it, which is valid. But also I think maybe it's just the better to take the risk. I think it's been proven just better to take the risk overall and put out the album and have the album done and like have a cohesive body of work, because it just makes better sense all around and makes a single work better.
And it makes the artist's fans enjoy that artist more too, like in the long term. I think for an artist, it's more of a risk than it is for the label, because the label's fronting that money, but like the artist is going to have to pay it back. Yeah. If they have this massive, expensive rollout and nothing comes of it, then like they're broke. Like they're out.
Yeah.
I think that's why you get like that mess of singles and EPs and a bunch of little like snackable products from the artist prior to an album, because it's like social media and streaming is this less costly platform to test your audience, see what kind of reaction it's getting, and then we'll give them more of that, and then we'll feel like we've gotten our money back, or our proverbial money back. I mean, that kind of speaks also to just the way that mid-tier pop artists get signed now, because it used to be that it was like the labels that did all the marketing work to get those names out there and in circulation, and radio as well, terrestrial radio. And now those said artists need to have a following already that they've kind of like DIY'd.
Yeah.
And then I think just more of the same type of testing, even after they get signed, until like an actual album is released.
Yeah, I was also going to bring up, because I feel like we're seeing it in real time with Sabrina Carpenter, the fact that, emails I can't send, she like worked that project so hard for the last 2 years and obviously like built concert by concert and like social media post by social media post, built this legitimate pop fan base after, toiling for years. And now it's like with Espresso, it's like, okay, let's go. Now is when I'm going to get the next album in the mix because people want it. Like I've built up enough of a new fan base. And then obviously, we've heard 2 tastes of that now going into Short and Sweet. And it feels like we're seeing her album roll out in real time. And it's a lot more like, it's like a scrappier album rollout because of the way that she's built her fan base up.
Yeah. Even with Chapel Run too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It was years of singles, and even with her new single Good Luck Babe, she has an album that a lot of songs that were, like 2-3 years old at that point on that album, and then just sort of rolled out the first song that she had written after releasing it just a few months later. And that ended up being like really positive for her. So it is fascinating when it does kind of work, but I'm hoping that there are more kind of investments in sort of making the albums first, more so going forward.
For artists that are returning, social media blackouts I know were a thing after Taylor did it with Rep. Are we over like these like endless cryptic teasers, or is it just me?
Yes. I hate them. Over them. Can't do
it's
them
like,
anymore.
are you ready? Like, yeah.
It's boring. It's so boring.
I know it's not an artist's job to think of journalists or anything or whatever people like have to follow this stuff for a living, but just the breadcrumb trail, just please find something else to do, whether it's reverting back to like the classic structure of like lead single, album title, release date, track list. Yeah, but it's also just maybe me showing my age.
Yeah, I'm over the blackout, and I'm over the having to dye your hair a new color every time you drop an album.
I literally thought of that as well.
I mean, like Dua, Camila, like Miley, like I'm just like, everyone, please, no more.
Or like a new nosebleed like The Weeknd.
Everyone's been doing it, and I'm just like, when did we decide that this is like the thing that you have to do? Like, in order to launch a new era, you have to take out the bottle of bleach and like see where it goes. Like, it doesn't make the music sound any different. It's done now.
I do feel like Dua is somebody we need to talk about in this conversation, just because for Radical Optimism, it feels like she tried to follow the same playbook that she did for Future Nostalgia, which was so successful.
Mm-hmm.
But I think there's a lot of factors that made it not, play out the same way. The obvious one being that it came out in March 2020.
We should have had another pandemic.
It was, yeah, that's not what I don't think Dua wants.
She was counting on another pandemic.
Right.
Dua was like, please.
It was a really disheartening moment, and she maybe, however unintentionally, met it with like just like pure joy.
It was like the kitchen dance parties, like people were dancing in their house to Future Nostalgia. There was a couple things at play, like people expected the new album to sound the same as Future Nostalgia maybe, and it didn't, but she did the exact same like timetable for the 2 or 3 pre-release singles, and it didn't play out the same way. And it's kind of a bummer because I actually really like this album, and I think it deserves listening, and I think that a lot of people played it off like it was some sort of flop because it wasn't the same buzz as Future Nostalgia. But that's another thing artists need to realize is like what worked for you before might not work the next time. You need to think about the project itself and where you are as an artist and as a celebrity and all of those factors, and where the society is, whether or not there's a global pandemic happening, etc.
Did you factor in the pandemic?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think she waited way too long between Houdini and the album. Like, I think dropping it in November and then waiting until May for an album was like wild, especially because the best time for her to have dropped it was in February around the Grammys after her Houdini dance went viral. Like, that was like all over TikTok. And I think that having like such a big stage where she was performing 2 singles from the album was like prime time to sort of have the album come out like a week or 2 later, because everyone was talking about it.
Yeah.
And then she wouldn't have been competing with second, third week, whatever, of Taylor Swift.
Yeah.
I think the major label system, especially in really any large company and definitely in entertainment, like they like to stay safe. They like to go with what worked before, which puts them, I think, at a loss because we live in this like reactionary news cycle that's primarily driven by the internet, social media, and TikTok. And I think it's like part of an artist's and marketing team's job to stay nimble, like try to find that middle ground between being planful, having your product finished so that it doesn't appear messy on the outside, but also just being like aware of like where the conversation is. What was being said earlier about it would have been really smart if Dua had released the album like while she was still like in the conversation and her Grammys performance was going viral. So like if you could just try to strike that middle ground between like mapping out what you're going to do and like what each date means in the album release drop, but also just being like, oh, well, maybe we should move this to this date because like this is a moment we need to capitalize on it.
Yeah. I also wonder with Dua, the difference between Future Nostalgia and Radical Optimism is like Future Nostalgia, I consider that her breakout album. Like she had her self-titled before, but like in the US it was like New Rules kind of felt like not even a Dua Lipa song. So it felt in the same way like what's happening with Chapel Roan and Sabrina Carpenter, where it's like we're getting that traction, we're slowly building up to something, like we're moving at a snail's pace because we're collecting everyone along the way and everyone's just excited to be in it. Whereas now it's like because she's post Future Nostalgia, I feel like people were expecting her to match her celebrity, I guess, which is like, announce a single, a week later it comes out, and then 2 or 3 months later the album comes out, which is like kind of like in the Ari mold right now.
Right. She wasn't moving like that. The thing that I said about Ariana, like knowing that her fans needed to hear from her, knowing that she had a story to tell, like about something that was happening with her publicly. It's like Dua didn't tell any sort of new story really, about herself.
Like her main criticism that she gets is like people don't feel like they know her. Having been in person with Dua once, I mean, she is so poised and things are so carefully plotted and planned that I almost wonder if that works against her if we're looking for a sense of authenticity.
So for the lead single, right, we have plenty of artists that have chosen great lead singles, obviously, and plenty that have been like not even on the album. I'm talking like Focus for Dangerous Woman, Bad Liar for Selena Gomez, WAP, who knows if that'll ever make the album, Motivation, Rumors for Special by Lizzo. Do you feel like it's a smart idea if you release a song and it doesn't do what you want to scrap it? Or do you feel like that kind of makes the whole album rollout look bad and it's not easy to start over again?
I think in streaming, it's actually a brave move of an artist to not include a song that people might know because they would get the streams from it, added in like once the album's out. So that means it's like an actual pure artistic choice. If you're not including it on that album, like that's how much you are not standing behind it anymore for that body of work. So I say scrap away.
It depends, because it's like some of them are well-known songs that you can just kind of tack on at the end, but it's better that you don't. But then some of them are like, you want to say that, oh, this album has had this many top 10 hits. And I guess it depends on like what you're playing for, whether it's like streaming numbers or whether it's chart points, or if you admit that that was a lead single because it was the first one that came out, like does that make your album look bad? Like
even a maybe poorly received lead single will still probably have a decent amount of love behind it, because it's all relative. Like with the artist's core, most diehard fan base, chances are anything that artist puts out will just lap up. I think that Taylor Swift, not to bring up Taylor Swift again, I think she's a pretty perfect example of someone who has historically made less than stellar first single choices and still goes on to have remarkable album cycles. But I don't know, I guess I'm more of the opinion of like, stand behind that choice. And because, someone liked it, you hopefully liked it as the creator. If you scrap it, then it may lead, I don't know, business people who write about this stuff to believe that like, oh, you're just doing this for the fans. And we on some level have to believe, I think, that artists are, creating art for themselves.
Yeah. I think like it also makes it clear that the album is not thought out already. Even if people hate the song Me by Taylor Swift, it's like that song fit into the album in a specific way and was not removed from the album, even if she removed like a dumb line from it. But like, that song still remained on it versus like, scrapping a kind of like flop sort of single that's like put out there and kind of testing the waters. Like it's clear that single was only existing to test the waters on what the next album should sound like or how it's going to perform. And I think people are smarter and can kind of sniff out that sort of like disingenuousness of like that single's purpose and existence sometimes. So yeah, I think like it makes it very clear that the album is like kind of relying on like the vibes around what makes a hit at that moment versus like an actual artistic expression, which kind of sucks.
You mentioned Bad Liar, and I still want to hear the Selena album.
Yeah.
Such a good song.
I would love for her to have like a Bonnie McKee rollout where she's like, actually, I'm going to release this 10 years later.
Yeah.
I'm also thinking of I'm Just Here for the Music by Paula Abdul. Do we remember that song from like 2008 when she was still on American Idol?
Oh, yeah.
I still need that album. I think that's an amazing song.
Now she's having a moment. Ariana referenced her in the Yes and video. Maybe it's Paula's time to come out of retirement.
Total. Oh my God. Please give us that album. That, like, to me, that's like a Selena Gomez in the Scene song. It's great. Going on the thought of like Me leading to Lover, which was very different from the vibe of Me, I guess. You also have like Yes and leading into Eternal Sunshine, which was definitely something that misrepresented the album. Do we feel like that was a good choice for Ariana to get the most different thing on the album out of the way first?
Yeah, I think it fit a moment too, and kind of like it was a different sound for her. I mean, like, I guess like a return to a sound she's only experimented with in like very small doses, but that like fit into like a greater kind of cultural pop trend. But yeah, I think it was a good move for her to start with that one and kind of lead in. I think like it's like that's the go-to now, right? For like a certain type of like A-list pop star to kind of lead with that song that says like, here's my answer to everything that you've been asking about. Let me just get this off my chest now and tell you to go fuck yourself, and then like, you know, move on with like my really emotional album about my divorce. And so that's sort of just like the kind of peak move that I think a lot of artists who have like a dating life that people care about do now.
Yeah, I have to hand it to Ariana. I think she succeeded in addressing the controversy around her new relationship. I think she succeeded in kind of like getting fans collectively back on her side through that song and video, way that Taylor maybe didn't quite succeed as much, even though she's like trained us to expect answers from her songs.
I don't think people cared about Maddie Healy enough.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think anyone expected her to go as deep as she did on the Maddie Healy of it
I sure
all.
wasn't. I think it's also fatigue. You know, we hadn't heard from Ariana in a while.
100%.
Yes.
In the same way, I'm thinking now too about like the back-to-back Miley album rollouts, you know, both albums, Plastic Hearts and Endless Summer Vacation, and like Midnight Sky versus Flowers, and both sort of having very similar purposes, which is both these albums are huge responses to the end of like a decade-long relationship, divorce, released a few years apart. And Midnight Sky is kind of more of the like, F you, I could do whatever I want type of song, leading into, you know, a very like kind of emotional rock album from her. And Flowers being the more empowering version is very fascinating in terms of like the success rates of those. Like, I find interesting to kind of see those two dueling type of like lead single narrative responses to the same thing, and one coming many, many years after the fact, like 5 or 6 years after the divorce had been announced, and having a much more impactful moment, a very new type of case study, I guess.
Miley really went, y'all didn't hear Midnight Sky? Okay, I'll give you the story, but just on a new song.
Just a different vibe right now.
She sang about Liam in every different genre. And then talking about pre-release singles, I still want more than one single before the album, me personally, like almost across the board. But how many singles until it's too many before an album's released?
I think 3 is a sweet spot, but it's personal preference.
Because Dua did 3, but I guess they were just spaced out too much.
Yeah.
I liked what Ari did. It's like honoring the old school tradition of giving us at least a single, but being modern and understanding that all of your chart points are going to be bigger if you put all the music video and the next single and everything all in one week. I prefer that to just the Billie Eilish and Taylor Swift drop of everything all at once, because I feel like you lose that time that you can spend with beginning of an album if it's binge listen all at once. I'm like actually with the one single strategy.
It feels different for every artist for me, where I'm like, if you're a newer artist, like I think any new artist, like your first 3 albums, you should probably be doing like 3. And I think after that, like 1 to 2, if that. I actually don't mind a full album drop day of. I think, to be honest, especially for someone like Taylor, like I actually much prefer to just listen to the album day of. Like, I feel like the discourse around her is so annoying now as someone who does like enjoy her music, where I'm like, I would rather just listen to the album day of instead of like having to deal with the single for a month on end. I like the Billie album. I don't think she was ready for it in the way that she thought she was. I think she should have dropped Lunch. It seems like the singles aren't really doing well. I mean, Birds of a Feather definitely could and probably will end up becoming a hit in a month or two, but right now it's competing against a lot of like really, really strong other pop songs in that category.
And it's surprising because, like, did Billie choose Birds of a Feather as the moment? Because it feels like it's become the radio moment, but the 2 music videos are Lunch and Chihiro. So who chose Birds of a Feather?
I know.
Who did this?
Yeah, I think it was the fans, because it's
Yeah,
the
the fans
streaming
chose
that's
it.
pushing it, right?
Yeah, that's the song that's been all over like TikTok for me.
It's the radio one for sure too, the pop radio one.
And it's so different for her.
Mm-hmm.
They gambled with not having a lead at all. It came out, I was like, oh, Lunch could be...
Oh, I love Lunch, you guys.
I think it was Billboard, too, was like Billboard Song of the Summer contender.
Yes, Billboard
right?
loves Lunch.
And then after 2 weeks, it's like now the third most popular song on the album. And it's so funny. Like, she has 3 songs. I mean, good for her, but she has 3 songs on one album, all fighting for attention, all released the same day.
Yeah, that is where... It's like the choice almost got put into fans' hands instead of her own by putting the album all out at once. Even though she obviously released the music video for Lunch, it's like people have decided what they wanted to pop.
I think Taylor and Beyonce, they're like in the echelon where they can comfortably get away with dropping something all at once.
Yeah.
Because like the discussion long tail is going to be so much more than the buildup. Like the buildup is almost like an afterthought. And then everything that we will unpack from all like the producers and the references and the stories and what do we think this means. And there's just so much lore behind both of those artists already in different ways that they kind of have the ability. And in the discourse, there's just like going to be such an after the fact. They like invert the existing rollout structure.
And yet Beyonce still does singles, which she really doesn't have to.
Yeah.
But I mean, obviously it did benefit to have like Texas Hold'em and 16 Carriages sort of like give a sense of the album and sort of this like very, very strikingly different direction for her and worked in her favor.
But we're still not getting music videos from her for whatever reason. We haven't talked about music videos in this conversation, but yeah, she's like obviously such a visual artist, and it's like crazy that we haven't gotten music videos for either of these last 2 albums.
Talking about like conspiracies, like all of her fans are like, Act 2 is the visuals, Act 3 is the visuals, like Act 6 will be the visuals at one point. And like she already announced the Renaissance era was over, so I don't know where these visuals are going. Like, do we really believe she had all those different sets and stages and outfits
and just did photo shoots
just for a split second? Yeah.
Right.
I kind of do. I feel like she does that on her Instagram a lot.
That's fair.
But I mean, I don't know. I think that's the problem and like the sort of issue with like taking over a certain style of release or certain style of debuting yourself. Like, I think that's like kind of like what haunts Lady Gaga, right? Like, that's what makes her career so complicated now, because there is this idea of like total shocking reinvention with every album. And the first time we saw that really, really fail her was like Art Pop, right? Like that was like only her 3rd album.
Underrated Art Pop.
I mean, Art Pop's great. But also like with Beyonce now, it's like the expectation of a visual album, which is not something she had done prior to her self-titled. It was not something that she needs to do for every album. Kind of like an artist not releasing a single. Like if she doesn't want to release a video, she really doesn't have to. But because she's so tied to the idea of a great video of like a visual album, it's like the expectation. So it's just like a weird place to be, I guess, for an artist, where it's like, you know, you do something so great and at a point in your career that sort of changes the entire music industry. Like every artist now changes themselves entirely because of what Gaga had done in her career and how that sort of was like such a big part of who she was, and like the fashion and the kind of the aesthetic and that full kind of shift, and the visual element of Beyonce and the surprise drop became so tied to who she was. Like, how can you grow as an artist and be different and change what you want to do or how you approach it if that's what you're known for and what you are completely intrinsically tied to?
And everything you just said shows how important Rollout is, because it's like we now understand that Art Pop is great, but living in the moment, it's like we all decided it was disappointing for whatever reason.
The video, wasn't it? Was it with the hamsters or whatever?
So it's like we now look back on it fondly, but it shows like the importance of all these little micro decisions that an artist has to make around the release of a project.
Yeah.
Going back to how many singles come out before an album, I'm about to coin a term here. I feel like I'm one of the only people who enjoys the overshare rollout, where it's like Era 1 for Kim Petras, where every song was a single, and then at the end she was like, here are 3 more songs. Or Clarity, where she released 1 song a week every Thursday, kind of like didn't announce that there was going to be another song every Thursday, so no one really knew which week the album was going to come out, the full album. I would love to see Beyonce do something like that. If she had done that around the time when Kim did that in 2019, I feel like that would have been a really cool way, before Taylor was getting 10 top 10 hits per album or whatever, if Beyonce had done that 9 times and then released the album, or 8 times and then released the album, who knows? Maybe she would have gotten like 11 or 12 top 10 hits, one each week.
Maybe you could adopt like a podcast model for singles.
Yes, a podcast model. That'd be interesting.
Weekly drop.
Yeah. And then there was like She Is Coming, Miley Cyrus. She was originally going to release 3 EPs, and the last one would like solidify the whole project. But then Hayley Williams did that a year later with Petals for Armor successfully. And Tori Kelly just did that this year with like 2 halves of the album. Like she released the first half last year.
Yeah. This is making me think of John Mayer did that. It was like 2017, I think. Yes. I did an interview with him back then, and I asked him like what the strategy was around it, or like the artistic choice. He's like, it was just so people would know that an album was coming. Like it was like each EP drop was its own promo for the eventual album. And he also, speaking of coining terms, he said the music industry is not a meritocracy, it's an awareitocracy. And that was his way. My problematic fave, John Mayer.
I'll give John Mayer that. That's good. That's good.
No one said he was dumb. He's a smart guy.
Right. But yeah, that EP strategy is literally like, if I have 3 EP releases adding up to an album, that's 3 more times people are talking about me and putting a headline up about me.
Also, do you feel like in terms of pre-release singles, so I'm not talking about like SOS or Midnights, but does hype die out if the pre-release strategy straddles Christmas? Because everything dies out in Christmas on the Billboard charts, but also just on streaming in general. People aren't as into new music.
Christmas takes over.
Yeah, because I think Don't Start Now with Dua Lipa.
That was November, just the same.
Yeah, but that gained a lot more traction in January and so on, like when everyone had come back from that. Whereas like Houdini, I think it got the most amount of traction in like the first couple weeks. So then I feel like, you know, having to wait until after Christmas to release another thing kind of killed it.
I agree.
Depending on when you're dropping the album, like you don't really want to drop it too close to when the actual Grammy ceremony is either, because then you kind of lose the momentum of like next year's Grammy contention, depending on like the type of artist you are again. But like you don't want to like roll out a single in November and then drop an album in January just because of that. So I guess that also kind of is dependent.
Yeah, and if you look at Taylor historically before Tortured Poets, she used to be pretty reliable with the October-November album release. Adele, obviously, as well, like building up to a November album release. That is strategic to probably get all that done before the Christmas comes in, and also to have a full year of Grammy eligibility within, you know, like it's like your awareness level is going to be November all the way through to August or September, whenever the eligibility period wraps up.
Totally.
Yeah. And also like 2 Grammys where you're like nominated depending on when you release the single. Because if you have the single out like August and that single does well, could ostensibly get nominated for that Grammys that comes immediately after the album comes out. And then by the next year, you have a whole other year of album promotion cycle for the next Grammy ceremony.
And then if you're Adele, Set Fire to the Rain live gets nominated.
Yeah.
Or if you're Lady Gaga, Joanne piano version gets nominated.
Exactly.
Or if you're the Black Pumas, the album gets nominated 6 years in a row.
Black Pumas, Jacob Collier.
Yeah.
The Grammys, I have one eye on the rest of the industry, and then the other eye is just always looking at whatever the Grammys like.
Their fave.
I also thought with the Taylor Swift, One Direction, Adele thing of releasing it every October or November, I thought like a big strategy of that was like you always get a huge boost of sales for Christmas. Like you want to get it out in time for Christmas.
Definitely.
Get that vinyl out.
Yeah, I think I read something about that on Billboard like 10 years ago.
Yeah. It's also like prime time for those events too, like the you know, Christmas tree lighting or like Rockin' New Year's Eve and all that stuff. It's like prime time for like highly televised events that you could perform your single at.
Totally.
Yeah, your post-album single at the Grammys or sing the national anthem at the Super Bowl or something like that. It is interesting because now we find the like typical strategy is like release the lead single in January because no one's releasing in January, and that's when all like the weird breakout smashes come through. Like that worked for Flowers, that worked for Driver's License. Now everyone's doing it, so I don't feel like it's gonna work for anyone else. But also I want to say like if the album covers various sounds, should the singles all reflect those sounds? Like should they be varied going back to Katie with Witness, I think Chained to the Rhythm, Swish Swish, and Bon Appetit all covered very different ground.
They sure did.
Houdini and Training Season covered like this one part of the album, and Illusion covered the other part of the album for Radical Optimism. And then Lover as well. Like, should it be that everything is kind of even with the singles and it should just be representative of the album? Or should it just be like, there's going to be a lot on this album in terms of sound, so we're just going to give you all different individual singles?
I feel like this is something that artists really dislike. I know whenever I do interviews and one song is out and I say, like, is this reflective of the project? Is this like what we can expect? They just want to be like, no, everything's different. Like, of course it's going to be all different, you know, like it's like, you know, it's 12, 15 different songs, whatever. They're not all the same. Of course, we can hear things that connect them and bind them. And there's themes, musical and lyrical themes. But I don't mind a song seeming like an outlier from the rest of the project, because I think I would be bored if they were too sonically similar.
Yeah.
So again, it comes back to Ariana, where yes, and it's definitely a sonic outlier on Eternal Sunshine, but it does tackle one of her like consistent themes throughout the album of like kind of answering to people's questions about her and her relationships and things.
Yeah.
I think also like now people need like a theme, like going back to Do It Again, people were like, we were going for a magician's theme and like with Illusion and Vertigo and Houdini, and now we're going to like a summer beach theme, and like people were like, I don't get it.
Sounds like you're describing like bar and bat mitzvahs. Like,
Yeah.
every album is a bar and bat mitzvah party. What's your theme?
But like, lest we forget, like Katy Perry, like I will go back to this as like, if it's not the pop Bible, it's definitely the pop album rollout Bible, which is like all of these songs that she released, we remember them all individually because with the visuals, she found a really good way to make them all unique. She had a different hair color in California Girls and a completely different style of like movie in California Girls as opposed to like Teenage Dream or E.T. or whatever. She like Last Friday Night, where she like had a different alter ego. And I feel like artists don't utilize that enough now to make the songs stand out from each other, because now the competition is like, we want to have the most cohesive album, or we want to be the most cohesive, because like that's a word that's being thrown around a lot by fans as like points, I guess.
Yeah.
I've been like, oh, but this person's like album is super cohesive, and I like an album that's cohesive too, but I also think it's nice to have some visual variety, at least in my opinion.
I like a cohesive album because I think there are a lot of ways to be cohesive. Not every song needs to sound exactly alike. I think one of my favorite kinds of albums to listen to, and not even just under the pop umbrella, is something that plays and experiments and is a bit coloring outside the lines, but there's still like a connective tissue. And that to me creates like an exciting challenge to try to explain why that's true, because often I feel like artists can't or don't want to. But I don't think first single necessarily needs to be reflective of the album as a whole, because I think most of the time it's just like people in a boardroom deciding what's going to generate the most interaction, like TikTok or like...
Oh, how have we not talked about TikTok yet, actually?
Yeah.
I think the music industry right now is like at least the top tier is kind of emulating the film industry and the TV industry. They're only going to accept like new material from already decorated people, and like, we know this will work, so we'll go with this.
Now, like everything that's creative is like, okay, but is it a sequel? Like
Yeah.
even the new Eminem song, it's a sequel. Everything needs to have some sort of IP. Pink Friday 2, even all the Ariana Grande videos that she's released. One is Paula Abdul, one is Catwoman, one is Eternal Sunshine, the movie, just reenacted by Ariana Grande. And I think it's very interesting that it's like, let me just attach my IP to someone else's IP, and then people will have an entry point no matter what.
It worked.
It did work, and we did list that as one of our favorite albums of this year.
Don't forget Brandy and Monica, their IP as well.
Totally.
Their song title IP.
Yeah.
I think that is genius.
Uh-huh.
And I know that talking with Bonnie McKee, she was like, if you get stuck on what to write about, look up some cool film titles. You know, SZA did that with Kill Bill. Like that's a movie title IP.
Yeah.
Should we talk about track lists? You know, obviously everyone's going to post a messy track list with like fonts and colors that nobody can read. But like, do we have like an ideal length for an album?
I do feel like Ariana, Billie, and Dua sort of all made the case for shorter track lists this year.
Yeah.
Taylor did not. But I will say, I feel like when it comes to putting them out before an album is out, I think that people, their biggest thing they look for now is features. Like they want to see who else is on the album. I feel like that's what fans are always looking for when track lists come out.
Or in some extreme scenarios, producers, if they're household names.
Yeah.
True.
But more often, features for sure. I've been talking about this a lot lately in interviews with artists who aren't even like pop or just out in public. Like it feels like songs are getting shorter, track lists are getting shorter. I think a lot of that has to do with like, can we slice off a bit of this? Like you're slicing off parts of a turkey. I like a traditional, like good 13 strong tracks, maybe 14. That's just because that's what I grew up with.
If the deluxe brings me to 16 songs, I'm happy with it. But there are no skip albums with more than 16 songs. I don't think they exist.
Yeah.
Planet Her is maybe the only one that I personally have no skips with. But even then, I'm like, there are two that easily could be cut, you know?
Yeah. I think an album has to be under an hour, just like generally in time sense, no matter what the track list. Like an album over an hour is insane. I might as well watch a movie.
Bruno Mars does albums that are like 9 songs.
I mean, I think Bruno's not an album artist. He's more of a singles artist. So
he wants to be an album artist. He thinks he's an album artist.
He really does.
Sorry, Bruno.
Yeah.
Silk Sonic was his best attempt at being an album artist, but
yeah.
And where should the singles go on the track list? Like, I personally, unless it's a song that sounds like the intro to an album, I really hate when all the first singles are like 1, 2, and 3.
This is streaming. We're back to a streaming problem. The front-loaded singles is 100% because of streaming. Like, they don't want to put the recognized song buried in the track list. They want you to come in on the single and stay through. The algorithms are messing things up, guys.
But the girlies are doing a better job with it right now, right? I think that like Olivia Rodrigo, if I remember correctly, Dua Lipa, Ariana Grande, they're all kind of like interspersed through the album.
Yeah, and I think it also just depends on like what the actual album content is too, right? Like it's like, what is the narrative here? Like what is the story that you're trying to tell? Like, I do really appreciate an album that does kind of have like a good sort of like narrative through line, like a thoughtfulness to the actual track listing. Like I've always found like Halsey albums are really good at that. Like she's always very good at sort of like creating some type of like through line of like how the album is taking you on that journey. So I do appreciate that when that is like possible, I guess, or makes sense for an album.
It also depends on the artist's fan base, because you have fan armies that will listen to every song and they don't need any like special algorithmic like strategies to keep their attention, because if they love that artist to the extent that like they are just interacting all the time with that artist, if that's their fave, then nothing will go unlistened to, regardless of track listing and order. But that's what I also appreciate, a balance where singles are interspersed.
There are definitely some things that fame affords you with your art, not only with budget, but like not having to cater to algorithms in certain ways, even though a lot of them still are. So now coming up to like album release, does the music have to match the month in which the album comes out? Is there a fall album, a summer album, a winter album? Like, are those real things, or do we just associate those with the albums that they happen to come out in?
That's a good question, but I feel like Tortured Poets is totally like a fall album that came out in April. So I guess the answer is they don't necessarily have to match, but I do enjoy it. I mean, I have to say like Post Malone's country song with Morgan Wallen that is dominating the Hot 100 right now is like tailor-made for the summer, and the music video literally is like a 4th of July advertisement with fireworks and American flags and things. And they clearly timed the release of that song to dominate the entirety of the summer so Morgan Wallen can yet again have the song of the summer. So I think that people definitely are thinking about season. Espresso is definitely a summer song too. So to put it out in April.
Short and sweet, hopefully that's a summer album.
Totally.
And I like the summer albums that get released end of May, early June.
Yeah.
Funk Wave Bounces coming out in August. I hate that. I hate that. But I guess if all the songs are summery, it's hard to start like a 3-month rollout before the album and have that start in like April or something.
Right.
Well, even though he started that in February, so what am I even talking about?
With the Taylor of it all, like maybe her albums are always fall albums because Evermore and Folklore, I think she definitely timed those properly for seasons. Like Folklore was right before the fall, Evermore was during winter. Like that really checked out. Tortured Poets, not a springy floral album to me.
Yeah. I remember also Baby Tate said something like a week ago, I think, where she said she's pushing her album to next year because she was like, it's a summer album. It's not ready in time for this summer. So I thought that was an interesting thing too, where I would imagine that a label wouldn't necessarily think that way, but it's interesting and nice to think an artist is so precious about. And Baby Tate's not in a Taylor Swift Beyonce situation where she can wait an extra year to release an album because she wants it out at the right time of year. But I just thought that was like a really strong and great decision on her part. Even though I haven't heard the album, I love when an artist is like conscious of like how people are going to perceive it and listen to it at first instead of just kind of rush everything out for commercial purposes.
That's a confident choice too, to think that you're still going to be in the same vibe next summer sonically. I mean, like, you must think that you're ahead of your time. Like, you're not working within trends if you can wait a whole year, you know?
Right. Oh, so you don't even mean like vibing with your own music, but everyone else.
Oh, a little bit of both. It's like, you know, you don't want something to feel dated, but if she as the artist is confident enough to say like, this is still going to be monumental when you finally hear it a year from now. You know what I mean?
Yeah. For post-release singles, there are several different strategies you can do now. It used to be just that you could push it to radio and that would be enough. Early 2010s, you know, all throughout the 2000s, that was like the move. It was like, that's how we get Kelly Clarkson's Breakaway. This one's getting pushed to radio and now it's the hit. This one's getting pushed to radio and now it's the hit. But I think the reason artists might want to release a bunch of singles before the album comes out is because you can't get any singles in, really. You can't get any attention for anything after the album comes out. But there are a few things you can do, I think, to make a song work after everyone's already heard it. One of them is like get the featured artist on a remix, right? Like the Karma, Cheap Thrills, Bad Blood, Levitating, Save Your Tears kind of strategy. My favorite is like get a buzzy music video and like put a lot of effort into it. Like the one that got away, Katy Perry did that. Telephone, its whole thing that it's remembered for is the music video. Like there was a lot of budget put into making that a moment. And then iconic performance like Paparazzi or Glitter in the Air or Daddy Lessons. That's another one.
I think it's helpful in the live experience when the artist goes on tour to like bring someone that they have as a feature out, and then that moment goes viral.
I mean, Cruel Summer being the lead song on Eras tour definitely is what like drove it to finally chart the way it did. I mean, then they picked up on that and did push it to radio and all that. But yeah, the tour was definitely what drove that. I also feel like you mentioned Planet Her earlier, like Doja Cat should write the book on this because like that album had the longest life. Yeah. And that was another one where when it came out, people wanted to label it a flop because it wasn't like a first week pop. But the way that that album rolled out singles after the fact, songs that we should have all been very familiar with, just kept becoming massive radio hits. A full year after it was still going.
It only had 2 pre-release singles, Kiss Me More and Need to Know. But then the song everyone wanted to hear when the album came out was Ain't Shit. But then you had like Get Into It, Yeah, that built up. You had Woman, which ended up becoming one of the biggest songs off of that album.
And You Right, too? Was that from Planet Her as well? Yeah.
I think that was the one that they pushed as a single like a week after or something.
But it was wild, the shelf life of that album. I mean, it was totally, it felt like as close to organic as possible in this time in the music industry. The way those songs just kept popping and popping and popping.
And she did that with Agora Hills this year too. Like,
Yeah, totally.
that's still on the Hot 100.
There's too much pressure put on the first week in general, and I understand why, because our attention spans are split into like a million little atoms between music and every other form of media. So trust me, I get it, but it's really not allowing for a second life, which is always really nice to see. And I think that happened. Like, that's partially why I like spending time on TikTok. It's like seeing years old songs that start gaining tons of new attention, like from a younger audience, because it's just like taken off like a meme.
Yeah, even like our definition of sleeper hit has changed so much. A sleeper hit used to be just like a song that takes, a few months to a year to like really kind of get to that peak that it would end up peaking at, versus like now our concept of a sleeper hit is like an old song, like past its promotion cycle, past the album cycle, Cruel Summer or Good as Hell.
Or a song from 1985.
Yeah, like it's so fascinating now that chance isn't given within the year that it's released, because that just kind of happens organically, like, we talked about like the duo singles and like, like Don't Start Now, like it gained traction in January, but didn't really become a hit until well after the album came out. And even that was like sort of because other songs from the album were starting to blow up. And so it's like really fascinating how quickly that's changed.
Totally. And that's where I can't fault Dua. Say what you want about this album rollout, but she really believed in all the songs that she was releasing. Like, she was like, these will be hits. I just got to keep putting promo into them and like give them time to like become a sleeper hit. Like, I know a lot of her fans are very insistent on the fact that all of her songs are sleeper hits. She doesn't have big debuts. She's not that Ariana Grande.
She's
like
kind of a sleeper hit of an artist in general.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember writing about her 10 years ago, I guess. Now it's like a decade later and she's A-list, but it took a minute.
I think Illusion's going to be that song. It's already having its moment. I think it's going to claw its way to the top 10 just like Levitating did.
Yeah.
Oh, I would love that. I would love that.
Mm-hmm.
I would prefer it to be These Walls, personally.
Oh, so good.
It's just perfect for radio. But
End of an Era is mine. The first song.
Also
Love.
so good. That's the one that always gets stuck in my head.
Mm-hmm.
So I was editing the Miley episode today, and we were talking about Used to Be Young, and I have this theory that it was always part of the album track list, because I remember Miley's mom was like, oh, my favorite song hasn't even come out yet, so everyone thought there was going to be a deluxe with that. But I think that they knew that like if it came out on the album, it wouldn't have popped off in the way that it did. Like, they kind of had to literally keep it off of the album and then tack it on in the middle later, so that when they wanted to push it as a single and not overshadow Flowers, that it had its own time to shine on radio. And I think that worked out pretty well, because it was really stable. That song wasn't like huge on streaming, but at least, it did really, really well on radio. I think it was like top 5 or something.
I feel like then it's like, why put the album out when she did? It's like, was it just to capitalize on Flowers? Because it's like, if the Flowers run, which ended up being 9 weeks or whatever, like if that's still going, why not let that ride out and then put your album out if you're worried about your own songs competing against it? Because it feels like that album did not work the way anyone wanted it to.
Yeah.
And so it's like, maybe if they would have waited for the end of the Flowers mania and then had this new pop with the album release and a new pop with Used to Be Young, because the other single that I'm spacing out, Jaded, what's the other single they did? Is that
River,
right?
I think.
River, right. Somebody dropped the ball there. I don't know. So I don't know. Used to Be Young probably should have been the second single all along, and it probably should have the album maybe just shouldn't have come. They announced it too early. They didn't have to announce it.
I think they announced
it
when Flowers came out.
Yeah,
right?
they announced it in January, and then they had to compete with I think Morgan Wallen, that Behemoth album. It's like they shouldn't have had to mess with that.
Yeah, I don't think they expected Flowers to go #1 for 9 weeks. If I was on Miley's team, I certainly would not have expected that.
No one could have predicted that.
And then I guess we've made it to the deluxe, right? Which is a way to repackage the album and extend its shelf life. It used to be, I think, the standard just to have the deluxe come out day of, because it's like, how much money do you really want to spend? Are you a fan of the artist and you're okay to spend more money for more songs, or are you just like a casual listener and it's like your first time, and then do you want like just the best stuff? Right? That's what deluxe used to be.
Well, it used to be you could get a Target version that had 2 songs, which they still do that too. but it's like you could only get those songs on the Target version. But I do think there were older examples of tacking on songs months later, like before streaming started.
The whole extended deluxe thing. So you have like Good Girl Gone Bad Reloaded, right? That came out a year afterwards.
Yeah.
One of the best examples of a deluxe where it's like that's just the canon version. But then there's like the Fame Monster and Cannibal and like Born to Die Paradise version, right? Where it's like these are 8 songs that like could be their own thing and we're just kind of
piggybacking,
lumping it in with the album. That was like a huge trend.
Yeah.
But like now that's coming back into style, I think, right? With like Guts Spilled and like Scarlet 2 Claude and like the whole repackaging.
It's almost like we're getting both. So yeah, Guts Spilled is the example of like Olivia putting that out earlier this year, but then there's the anthology from Tortured Poets dropping, or the 3 a.m. edition for Midnights dropping the same night. And then I know there's a lot of hip hop examples of deluxes coming out within the same week. Like, you know, they'll just drop 10 new tracks or tack them on to an album within the same week or even a week later.
Yeah, like Charlie just did that like a week, like barely a week later, right? With like 3 new songs.
Planet Her did that.
So it feels like people are wielding it however they feel like wielding it. I feel like Olivia did a really great job. I think that the tour starting and like people thinking about Guts again, and then I feel like Obsessed has been its own moment from the deluxe that's really like continued that album cycle really smartly. I feel like she's a good example of what to do.
Yeah, if someone wants the roadmap, not that one exists, but if someone wants like a solid, these strategies worked, then Olivia is a fine example to follow. I think it's kind of a balancing act, truly, because like I understand the need to be creative and prolific with expanded editions and deluxe albums, because there are just so many fewer ways to earn money and everyone needs to get paid and extend an album shelf life if you're going to be touring for like 2-3 years. But I think it's gotten a little excessive.
Yeah.
I wonder, some albums, are they stronger because they don't have a deluxe? Like, I still think of Control, the SZA album. I know that she had her deluxe on her 5-year anniversary, but like, I still think of Control as something without a deluxe because that's what was canon to me for 5 years of its release.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of things like Eternal Sunshine, I'm grateful that she had that like quote unquote slightly deluxe, where she was throwing on the like the live versions, the covers, the acoustic versions, remixes, whatever, but like she kind of made it clear that like the album stands on its own, and like I can give you this like extra stuff and play the game, but like the album is its own thing, and that is the canon version. And does that work for like when you're reviewing music, Brittany? Do you consider the canon tracks to be the ones on the standard, or is it just a case by case basis on how the artist presents it?
It depends on what they give. So like when I reviewed Brat, I didn't get the extra 3 songs. I'm trying to remember other ones, like other examples.
Did you review Tortured Poets?
I didn't review Tortured Poets. I did review Midnights, and I didn't hear 3 a.m. And our Tortured Poets reviewer did not hear the anthology until it came out.
Yeah, same.
So yeah, I don't know. It's like, it depends, I guess. Like, I think with Brat reviewing it, it's like those bonus tracks feel very much like these are kind of like tacked on to the album, like in a fun way. Like it doesn't make or break the album for me. And they do feel like this like extra kind of like gift, I guess, to that album, versus like, you know, something like Midnight's 3 a.m. Like I was kind of like, I kind of wish I had the 3 a.m. tracks while reviewing this album, because it gives like a whole brand new context to the album. I felt the same way even without reviewing Tortured Poets. And I think like the Gut Spilled example is a good example of like, again, like that kind of coming later. Like Obsessed was on the physical versions of the album, which was like a very Target exclusive type of like, if you buy the album, you get this like treat of like this extra song, and then kind of like bringing it back later with this like little like pre-tour gift almost to fans and to listeners was really nice. But yeah, it kind of depends. Like there are some times where, you know, I'll get a stream and it's like there are bonus songs on there. I'm like, this might as well just be on the album. Like I guess like the Gracie one is an example where like that song is technically like a PS on the album, she keeps calling it. And I'm like, just consider it part of the album at this point. Like it's probably going to be your first really big hit.
Yeah.
You might as well consider it part of the album. Like we don't need to pretend like it's not part of it. So stuff like that, like the purpose of the bonus tracks has kind of lost meaning. in a lot of ways. And I think artists don't really know what to do with them other than thinking from like a capitalistic point of view of like, I'm releasing a vinyl album and I want to have a bonus track on it, or like I'm trying to like get more streams or whatever. So I think it's kind of lost that meaning.
I was just thinking about New Romantics, which is probably the most famous bonus track of this millennium. We used to think of bonus tracks as being throwaways, and then that song came out and it was like, first of all, why wasn't this on the regular album? Why is this bonus? And then it ended up actually being a single, and it was the same sort of thing as Cruel Summer, where it was sort of tour powered, that New Romantics became its own moment, had a live music video that came out with it. Brittany, I think Rolling Stone put New Romantics as like one of their best song of the year or something.
Yeah.
And it was a bonus track. So I guess the lore around that is like, why was this a bonus track? Like, this should have been a proper single.
To like a previous thing you were saying, AJ, about like artists who don't do that, or like albums that don't do that. Like I think like Harry Styles is a very good example of an artist who has completely evaded that. Like he's released 3 albums. He has songs that he performs live that fans have begged him to release, like Anna and Medicine specifically. But you know, I think that's pretty interesting that he's kind of avoided. And I kind of like that because I think it sort of looks towards the longevity of his career, where he's basing his career off of so much like classic rock type of structure.
He's Bruno Mars in that way, yeah.
Yeah, and I feel like, you know, kind of letting the album sit as its own thing, having these like deep cut songs that if you're a real fan and go to the shows and you are experiencing them live, or you're watching the videos, or you're kind of engaging in a way that's like beyond just like listening to the singles, you know those songs and you like can know them by heart just by experiencing it that way. And then one day he can release like a box set or like something like, you know,
Rarities.
like rarities,
Yeah.
things like that. Like it kind of opens up a new door that looks like 10, 20, 30 years ahead. And it's a kind of fun, smart strategy that allows him to actually think about his career as beyond just that album existing.
Do you remember Hidden Tracks?
Oh,
Yes, I
loved Hidden
Yes.
Tracks.
Shivas by Kelly Clarkson was like platinum in my headphones.
Back hidden tracks.
There were like 3 minutes of silence between the
Yep.
two things.
Yeah.
Wild in the streaming era, so obviously it's not happened. But like, I don't know. I think with Deluxe, there are 3 kind of ways that you can go about it, right? You can like do like the Plastic Hearts Eternal Sunshine thing where you're like, I'm just going to do things that are clearly not canon to the album. Like Miley was like, I'm going to put the covers that I did that everyone loved, like Zombie and Heart of Glass, on there. I'm going to do the like Stevie Nicks remix. But then you can also do the thing that like, I think like Prism by Katy Perry, that's an album where I feel like people who only listen to the standard version kind of miss out. Like I think that the deluxe tracks or the bonus tracks really round out the album and go for that more mature sound that she was aiming for, and I think just was afraid to fully do and pivot from Teenage Dream. But then there's the third one, which is like the Future Nostalgia Moonlight Edition set, where it's like, let's just put on all the features that I've done for other artists and all the songs that are clearly not meant to be part of this album. Let's just put them on for streaming points. Like Cause I Love You, the Lizzo album, the super deluxe that you referred to earlier, like that was kind of wild watching in real time her being like, oh, let me just like add an old song, add another old song, add another hit that came about, like the Ariana Grande remix now of that hit, and like that's the one that got nominated. Very specifically, they were like, this is the one that's getting nominated at the Grammys because we don't want to nominate the version of the album without Truth Hurts and Good as Hell.
Yeah.
But then you wonder, will Chappell Roan do that? Will she put Good Luck Babe, which she said very clearly was supposed to be like a standalone single, is that going to end up being tacked on to The Rise and Fall of a Midwest Princess, because that album's almost top 10? Like, if it has a chance at number 1, adding Good Luck Babe would probably bring it there. Like, is she going to do that so that she has a number 1 album?
Yeah, I'm sure her label has encouraged her to do that. And if she hasn't at this point, I don't think that they will. Like, I feel like that decision would have been made already. But I also think, like, what we haven't talked about in this conversation is, like, I know albums as a medium have been not as important to the newer generation of artists. Like, not all of them, not speaking for everyone, but for some. And so I think that her declaring this as a standalone is sort of her artistic license to do that, and it's way more normal now for there to be standalone singles. But the label typically wins in tacking them onto something to give those points.
Yeah.
Espresso was marketed as like just a little song before tour.
Oh, now it's obviously going to be on Short and Sweet. Yeah.
Yeah, it was retcon to Short and Sweet's lead single, which I also wonder, like, was Short and Sweet finished at all when that happened? Or
I bet it wasn't.
Oh, I feel like it was.
You do?
I think Espresso was the lead singer. I think she just didn't want to reveal that it was an album.
Right.
When do you think she worked with Jack Antonoff for Please Please Please? Because I'm curious about that. Like, and I wonder how much he's going to be on that track list too.
I'm guessing probably sometime like the Australia tour was like.
Oh, like during the Taylor tour. Yeah.
Yeah, she's working with like, during the Taylor tour. I mean, she was spending time with Taylor a lot during the winter.
Yep, that makes sense.
It definitely could have probably happened like at the same time that Tortured Poets was getting wrapped up.
It sounds like a lot of resource sharing.
Yeah.
I was going to say, from all four of our professions, I feel like we could put things together and actually get down to the bottom of things. This is a really good super team up. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Did we have anything else to add? I feel really good about this.
Yeah.
Me too. It's been
so
great
much.
talking with everyone. I feel like I've been aware of all of you for so long. It's nice to actually talk.
Yeah, same. A fan of all three of you.
Yeah.
Oh, that makes me so happy. Thank you so much to Rachel. Thank you so much to Brittany. And thank you so much to Katie for coming on the podcast. Thank you so much to Noah for the theme music. And I'll see you guys in the next one.